To find the form of an argument, you look for two things. One thing you look for are operators. Another thing you look for are basic statements. An operator is something that takes other statements and turns them into a new statement. Examples of operators, and these aren't the only ones, but these are a few, are if, then, and not. If you take one statement and put it here on the if, then, and another statement, put it here on the if, then it gives you this new statement. If X, then Y. If P, then Q. If one thing, then another thing. Another operator is not, or it's not the case that. Takes a statement and changes it into a new statement. Not, or it's not the case that is just another way of saying it's not true that blah. So like the sky is blue. If you put not in front of it, it's just like saying the sky isn't blue. Now let's talk about some common argument forms, and let's use the method we just talked about for finding argument forms. So here's a sample argument. If it's raining outside, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. That's the first premise. Second premise is it's raining. Conclusion, so the ground is wet. The basic statements in this argument, the statements that don't have any operators in them, are it's raining, which appears here and here, and the ground is wet, which appears here and here. Those are our two basic statements, and then there's just one operator in here, if, then, and it appears there. So if you want to find the form of an argument, take each basic statement, go to each place in the argument where it occurs, and replace it with a letter. So it's raining appears here and here, so let's replace each instance of it's raining with a P. The ground is wet appears here and here. Let's replace each instance of the ground is wet with a Q. And that gives us if P, then Q, P, so Q. That argument form is valid. Anytime you can take something and using that method put it into this form, you just know it's valid. This argument form is called Modus Ponens. Guaranteed to be valid. Now, there's a tricky argument form that sometimes makes people think it's Modus Ponens, but it's not. So you've got to be careful to distinguish between this argument form, if P then Q, P so Q, which is valid and guaranteed to be valid, with another similar argument form. So here, first premise is the same as the last argument. If it's raining, then the ground is wet. Whoops, that should be... that should be this. Okay. If it's raining, then the ground is wet. That's the first premise. The ground is wet. That's the second premise. So the conclusion is it's raining. And you take every instance of it's raining, it appears here and down here, and replace it with a P. So you get a P here and a P here. You take every instance of the ground is wet and replace it with a Q. So you got a Q here and a Q here. And you get this form, if P then Q, Q so P. This is not Modus Ponens, and you might get tricked into thinking it's Modus Ponens, but it's not, and there will be both sorts of examples on the exam, so make sure you can tell the difference between the two. A way to see why this argument form isn't valid is to tell a story where 1 and 2 are true, but 3 is false. Remember, 1 says, hey, raining is enough to make the ground wet. Raining's going to make the ground wet. 2 says the ground is wet. So can we tell a story where it's true that raining's enough to make the ground wet, and it's true that the ground is wet, but it's not raining? Well, we can. So imagine that you turn on the sprinkler outside, and the ground gets wet because the sprinkler's on. In that case, it's still true that raining's enough by itself to make the ground wet. Still true that if it rains, then the ground's wet. It's still true that the ground is wet, but the ground's not wet because it's raining. The ground's wet because you've got the sprinkler running. So the conclusion is false. It's not raining. That's the whole reason you turned on the sprinkler in the first place. So 1 and 2 are true, but 3 is false. It's not valid. This is not modus ponens. In fact, let's call this argument Toby, just to give it a ridiculous name, just to show you that this is the argument that doesn't work. Modus ponens, the argument with the fancy name, is the one that is valid. Toby's not valid. So keep that in mind as you take the test.